Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. You know, I always love looking up the Merriam-Webster word of the day, and today's is particularly interesting. It's denigrate, to unfairly criticize someone or put them down.
Yeah. We're going to be unpacking that today. Denigration,
Yeah.
looking at why people do it, the psychology behind it, its effects, and what we can all do about it.
I'm really intrigued by the mix of sources we have for this one. We've got personal stories, we've got thought-provoking questions, we've got some really surprising comparisons. So I think we're in for some insightful reflections on human behavior.
Definitely. And jumping right in, one question that really grabbed my attention was about when criticism crosses the line into being harmful. One source brought up this powerful analogy of a friend who's fallen into a well.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes you think, right? If you saw your friend trapped down there, you wouldn't start lecturing them about how they should have been more careful, would you?
No, no, of course not. You'd want to help them out first, right?
Exactly. Your first instinct would be to offer support to get them back on solid ground. Then maybe later you could talk about how to avoid those wells in the future.
I see. So it's kind of like separating the person from the problem.
Precisely.
Like, hey, I'm so glad you're okay, but let's figure out how this happened so we can prevent it next time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It reminds me of that sandwich technique
Yeah, yeah.
where you try to cushion constructive criticism with some positive reinforcement.
Right. Because at the end of the day, criticism should be about helping someone grow, not tearing them down.
Which leads us to, I think, the core question here.
Yeah.
Why do people feel compelled to denigrate others in the first place? One source got really candid talking about how they felt this urge to just lash out, share their anger during an argument with their partner.
That's so real, though, right? And what I find fascinating about that is this deep-seated desire for alignment. Even if it's negative alignment, it's like we want to create a shared experience with the other person, even if that experience is rooted in frustration or anger. But as the source realized, that usually just makes the conflict worse.
It's so true. It's like in the heat of the moment, all you can think about is dragging the other person down into that negativity with you.
Yeah.
But it never really solves anything, does it?
No, not at all. Sometimes you just need a little space to cool down before anything productive can happen.
100%.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a bit, another source connected self-worth to how we perceive other people's accomplishments.
Now, that's an interesting link. They were arguing that low self-worth can actually breed envy.
Makes sense.
If you're constantly putting yourself down, it becomes harder to genuinely celebrate other people's successes.
Yeah. There was this one line that really stuck with me. It said, "Rich, successful people with crappy personalities are not worthy in my eyes." And it made me stop and think, you know, what do I consider worthy? Am I placing too much emphasis on external achievements like wealth and status? Or is there more to it than that?
That's such a powerful question for all of us to consider, right? What is our definition of worth? Are we measuring ourselves and others against external markers, or are we cultivating a sense of intrinsic value?
Yeah, deep stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on tight because the next source throws a bit of a curveball.
Yeah.
They ask, can competition actually fuel denigration?
It absolutely can. And they made this really vivid comparison to those movie scenes where you see characters literally climbing over each other to get to the top.
Oh, yeah.
And while that's obviously exaggerated for dramatic effect, it taps into something very real about human nature.
It does. It does.
We all have that primal instinct to compete to win, and sometimes that desire can overshadow everything else,
It's like all logic goes out the window.
especially when emotions are running high, like the source was describing. It can feel almost impossible to resist that urge to put someone else down if you think it'll give you an edge.
It's like our brains just short circuit.
Right. And it's important to acknowledge that we're not always rational beings. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to give in to those urges sometimes. But the key is to try to learn from those moments and do better next time.
So if competition can be this breeding ground for denigration, what's the antidote? What can we do to counter that net? I'm thinking empathy has to play a big role here, but how do we actually put that into practice? The next source had some interesting thoughts on that.
They were really emphasizing the importance of relating to other people's mistakes,
Right.
recognizing that shared human experience. It's about being able to say, hey, I can see how I could have made that same mistake. I understand where you're coming from.
It's like that whole putting yourself in their shoes idea, right?
Exactly. And suddenly that urge to criticize or judge starts to fade, and it's replaced by the sense of understanding.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. But what about when we're on the receiving end of denigration? What about those times when we're the ones feeling undervalued? Another source tackled that very challenge.
They had this really practical three-step approach.
Oh, yeah.
First, remove yourself from the situation. Give yourself some space to breathe.
Okay.
Second, process your emotions. Allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling without judgment. And then third, remind yourself of all the positive aspects of your life. Call to mind all the things that make you feel good about yourself.
This is like shifting your focus.
Exactly. And one idea that really stood out to me was this concept of preparing for feeling undervalued. It's like having a mental toolkit ready to go when things get rough.
Interesting. So it's almost like proactively building up your emotional resilience.
You're not caught off guard by those negative feelings because you've already got these reminders of your own value.
I love that. Okay, one last question before we move on to part 2. What effect does unfair criticism have on our confidence? One of our sources got really personal, talking about their own experiences with confrontation. And it wasn't always pretty.
It was really brave of them to be so honest because it highlights how complex these situations can be. They admitted that they sometimes avoid confrontation altogether, especially when they're not sure how to handle it effectively.
And isn't that something we can all relate to on some level?
Yeah. We want to stand up for ourselves or for others, but we also don't want to make things worse. It's a delicate balance.
It is. It is. All right, well, we're going to dive deeper into that and much more when we come back for part 2, so stay tuned.
We'll see you then. Welcome back. You know, before the break, we were talking about how unfair criticism can really knock our confidence. And sometimes it's hard to know the best way to respond.
What really struck me was how the source talked about the difference between, like, casual confrontations and those more serious situations. They said in those high-stakes moments, where someone's safety might be at risk, their instinct is to act immediately.
Yeah.
Call for help. But in everyday disagreements, they're more likely to hold back, especially if they don't feel equipped to handle it.
That's so insightful. It really speaks to the importance of self-awareness, recognizing your own limits, and knowing when to seek support. It's okay not to have all the answers. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step aside and let someone else take the lead.
Yeah. Thinking about everything we've discussed so far, it seems like empathy keeps coming up as this key ingredient in navigating criticism and denigration.
It's essential. It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people.
Right?
If we can approach these situations with more compassion and understanding, maybe we can break that cycle of negativity.
Maybe. So how do we cultivate more empathy? What does that look like in practice?
Well, it starts with recognizing the shared humanity in all of us. Even when someone is messing up or behaving badly, it's about trying to understand their motivations, their struggles, their pain.
Because we've all been there, right?
Exactly. We've all made mistakes. We've all acted out of hurt or frustration. And that understanding that shared human experience can be so transformative, not just for the person receiving it, but for the one offering it as well.
Another big idea that keeps popping up is the importance of self-worth.
Absolutely. Crucial. When we value ourselves, other people's successes don't feel so threatening. We're able to celebrate them genuinely. And when we face criticism, we can handle it constructively without letting it chip away at our confidence.
It's like having this inner shield against negativity.
Right, exactly. It's not that you become immune to criticism, but you're able to process it in a healthier way without taking it so personally.
So you're more resilient.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that one source had some really practical advice for dealing with feeling undervalued. Remember that 3-step process they outlined?
Oh, yeah. Remove yourself, process your emotions, and then remind yourself of all the good stuff.
Exactly. It's like creating a mental first aid kit.
I like that.
Packed with all the things that make you feel good about yourself. Think about the compliments you've received, the challenges you've overcome, the things you're genuinely proud of. Write them down. Keep them somewhere safe and pull them out whenever you need a boost.
I love that. It ties into this theme of taking control of your own narrative.
Right.
You're not reliant on external validation because you have the power to define your own value.
It's so empowering. When you know your worth, other people's attempts to denigrate, you lose their power.
Because you see it for what it is.
Exactly. You recognize it as a reflection of their own insecurities, and you choose not to let it affect you.
That's not to say we should just ignore all criticism or pretend it doesn't hurt, though, right?
Of course not. There's a difference between constructive feedback, which can help us grow, and denigration, which aims to tear us down.
Right. So how can we tell the difference?
Well, constructive feedback is usually specific. It focuses on actions rather than attacking someone's personality, and it's offered in a supportive way.
So, for example, instead of saying you're lazy, someone might say, hey, I noticed you missed that deadline. Is there anything I can do to help you manage your time better?
Exactly. It's about offering concrete suggestions for improvement, not just putting someone down.
Okay, that makes sense. So when we're on the receiving end of denigration, what are some ways to cope? We've talked about Self-care, removing yourself from the situation, processing emotions. Are there other tools we can use to protect ourselves?
One technique that can be really helpful is called reframing.
Reframing.
It's about consciously choosing to view the situation from a different angle. Instead of internalizing the criticism, try to understand the motivations behind it.
So, for example, if someone's making snide remarks about your work, you might consider if they're feeling insecure about their own abilities.
Or threatened by your success.
Right. It's not about excusing their behavior, but understanding it might help you take it less personally.
Exactly. You see the criticism as a reflection of their issues, not an accurate judgment of your worth. And that can take away some of its sting.
Another strategy I find helpful is setting boundaries.
Yes, crucial. If someone is consistently denigrating you, it's important to let them know that it's unacceptable.
So you might say something like, I'm not comfortable with how you're speaking to me. Please stop.
Exactly. And if they continue, you have the right to distance yourself from them. You don't have to tolerate abuse from anyone, even if they're a friend, family member, or colleague.
It's about putting your own well-being first.
Absolutely. And creating a safe environment for yourself.
As we're talking, it's striking me that this conversation about denigration goes beyond individual experiences. There's a societal level to this as well, where certain groups are systematically denigrated.
You're absolutely right. We see it in how women, people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, and other marginalized groups are often targeted with criticism and belittlement. And these forms of denigration can have a devastating impact, perpetuating inequality and undermining the self-worth of entire communities.
It's like these systemic forms of denigration create a culture where it's seen as acceptable to put certain groups down, question their abilities, silence their voices.
And that's why it's so important to challenge those norms and speak out against all forms of denigration, whether they're directed at individuals or entire groups of people. We all have a responsibility to create a more just and equitable world where everyone feels valued and respected.
So as we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, I'm struck by how interconnected all these ideas are. Self-worth, empathy, boundaries, social justice. They're all pieces of this puzzle when it comes to understanding and overcoming denigration.
And ultimately, it comes down to recognizing our shared humanity, embracing our differences, and building a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Let's take another quick pause to gather our thoughts, and we'll be back soon to wrap up our exploration of denigration and its effects.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into denigration. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And, one thing that's really resonating with me is how we all have this responsibility to create a more supportive and empathetic world.
Yeah.
And it starts with each of us, examining our own biases and challenging those norms that perpetuate denigration, and then actively promoting respect and understanding in our interactions with others.
When we were talking about systemic denigration in the last part, it really got me thinking about social media.
Oh, interesting.
Because it feels like those platforms can really amplify negativity
Oh, for sure.
and create these echo chambers where denigrating behavior becomes almost normalized.
It's true. Social media, it's such a double-edged sword, On the one hand, it can connect us with people all over the world, and it can give a voice to those who have been marginalized.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can also fuel hate speech and cyberbullying and all these other forms of online denigration.
And it's like the anonymity of the internet gives some people the courage to say things they would never say to someone's face.
It's true. And the algorithms often reward the most inflammatory content.
Right.
So negativity tends to rise to the top.
Yeah, it creates this vicious cycle
It does.
where negativity just breeds more negativity.
Absolutely. So we really have to be mindful of the content we consume and how we interact online.
So what can we do about it?
Well, we can choose to engage with positive and uplifting content.
Okay.
We can challenge hateful speech when we see it. We can report abusive behavior.
We could unfollow those accounts that are constantly putting out that negative stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about taking ownership of our digital spaces and shaping them to reflect the world we want to live in.
I love that.
Wow.
It really all comes back to that idea of personal responsibility, doesn't it?
It does. It's a theme that's woven throughout this entire conversation.
Yeah, it's not enough to just acknowledge the problem. We have to actually do something about it,
Exactly.
both in our own lives and in the world around us.
And it starts with these small, everyday actions, like speaking up when we see someone being treated unfairly, offering support to those who are struggling, challenging our own biases when we notice them,
And just being mindful of our language,
Yes.
how we communicate with each other.
choosing to be kind, choosing to be respectful,
Yeah, focusing on building people up rather than tearing them down.
and remembering that change doesn't happen overnight.
Right. It takes time.
It takes patience. It
Yeah.
takes persistence. And it takes a commitment to creating a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
So as we come to the end of our deep dives, I just want to leave everyone with a few things to think about.
Yeah. What resonated with you the most from all these sources we've discussed?
What new perspectives did you gain?
And most importantly, how can you apply these insights to your own life?
How can you be a force for positive change in your relationships, in your community, in the world at large?
Remember, even the smallest acts of kindness and empathy can have a ripple effect,
They can.
creating a more compassionate and supportive environment for everyone.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this exploration.
We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
And maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself.